You think only the narcissist has issues. Get ready to see what few dare to speak about. No one is born a manipulator, and no one wakes up one day and unconsciously falls into the arms of someone who wounds them. Behind every toxic relationship are two people both deeply wounded in childhood, only differing in how they survived the pain. The narcissist built a mask of arrogance to never feel vulnerable again. The other person, perhaps you chose to open your heart so wide that they lost themselves. This isn't just the tragedy of love. It is a mirror of unhealed childhood trauma, still shaping your choices in silence. In today's video, we're not just breaking down the narcissist's behavior, we're bravely turning the lens inward to uncover why you were drawn to them and how to finally break the cycle from its root. This isn't a video about blame, it's a path to awakening where you'll find the answers you've long deserved. If you feel seen in these words, don't look away. Stay until the end of this video, because what you're about to hear may forever change the way you see yourself, your past, and your definition of love. And if this resonates with your healing journey, hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because you don't have to walk this path alone. You didn't fall in love with them because they were good. You fell in love because their pain mirrored the wound inside you that was never healed. Attraction is not always healthy. Sometimes what makes your heart race isn't love, it's the memory of a familiar pain. The human brain and body function in strange ways. They don't distinguish right from wrong, they only recognize what's familiar versus unfamiliar. And if your childhood was filled with emotional uncertainty, constant striving for affection, or emotional neglect, then as an adult, you're more likely to feel drawn to people who recreate that emotional chaos. That's why narcissists can feel hypnotically attractive. They're charming, confident, mysterious, and they make you feel like you have to earn their love. They bring back the emotional blueprint you once lived, the craving for validation, the fear of abandonment, and the hope that if you're good enough, they'll finally change. The truth is, love should not feel like a competition. But for those with unhealed childhood trauma, emotional pain becomes so normal that when someone treats you with genuine kindness and consistency, you feel bored. Not because they aren't good enough, but because your nervous system is wired to feel excitement in chaos. And then you meet someone like them, a narcissist. They make you feel special, electrified, deeply connected. But it's not destiny. It's a warning sign. A signal that your unhealed pain is choosing for you. In the next section, we'll explore the 7 psychological traits of the underempowered narcissist, a term for those who don't wear the grandiose mask of the typical narcissist, but still repeat patterns of control, manipulation, and denial from a place of emotional weakness. It could be you, it could be me, it's anyone who's ever tried to use love to fill the void left by childhood pain. If what you're hearing speaks to something deep within you, keep watching and hit subscribe, because on the other side of pain is freedom if you're willing to face the truth. Trait 1. You saw the red flags but you ignored them. Let's be honest. You didn't miss the red flags, you overrode them. There was that moment, the strange look in their eyes, the offhand comment that stung a little too much, the way they dismissed someone else's emotions in front of you. Deep inside, something whispered, "This doesn't feel right." But instead of listening, you rationalized it. You told yourself they were just having a bad day, that no one's perfect, that maybe you were being too sensitive. And that's where the dynamic begins. See, narcissists ignore red flags in others too, but for a different reason. They believe they're above consequence. You, on the other hand, ignore red flags because you've been trained to doubt yourself. Maybe you grew up in a home where speaking up led to punishment, or where emotional neglect was masked as normal. So now, when discomfort arises, your instinct isn't to walk away, it's to try harder. This trait is not just about denial, it's about control. From an underempowered place, you're trying to control the narrative. If I can make them love me, then I was right to stay. But love based on self-abandonment is not love, it's fear in disguise. And deep down, you knew it. You felt the red flag hit your gut like a warning shot. But instead of running, you stayed and tried to turn red into green. That's not weakness. That's conditioning. You were taught that love meant effort even when it hurts. But here's the truth. When someone shows you who they are, believe them. The first time, not the 10th. Not after the damage has been done. This is the first mirror. And it takes great courage to look into it and say, "I saw it. I knew. And next time I'll choose differently." Because healing begins the moment you stop justifying the harm you feel. In the next part, we'll explore trait 2, the savior complex, why we believe we can fix the narcissist, and how that belief becomes its own form of control. If this truth resonates with you, Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the bell because your healing matters, and the more you understand yourself, the less you'll be attracted to what once wounded you. Trait 2. You believe you can save them. There's something strange about those who've experienced deep childhood wounds. They don't just seek love, they seek a mission. They don't just want to be loved, they want to rescue someone from the kind of pain they once knew too well. And that's why you stayed even when you knew they were hurting you. You weren't in love with who they were. You were in love with who they could become. You saw their brokenness and thought, if I'm kind enough, patient enough, they'll change. And so you stepped into the role of the healer. Not because they asked you to, but because you couldn't bear the helplessness of watching someone fall apart, just like you once watched your parents, loved ones, or even yourself. But that's not love. That's repetition of trauma. You try to fix others because you haven't yet learned how to hold space for your own pain. You give and give, sacrifice, tolerate, and each time they show a glimpse of change, you convince yourself that it means hope. But then the cycle resets, and you begin again believing this time will be different. The hard truth is, you can't heal someone who doesn't want to change. You can love them, forgive them, wait for years, but if they don't choose their own healing, your effort only drains you. And you know this, yet you stay. Not because you're weak, but because being the rescuer gives you a sense of worth. It distracts you from facing the truth, that you are also in need of healing. Trait 3. You obsess over analyzing them. You can't stop thinking about them. When things are good, you feel like a child finally being held. But when they go cold, become harsh, or disappear without explanation, you can't sit still. You start analyzing every action, every text, every look. You scour the internet for articles on narcissism. You watch videos, ask friends, even ask them, why are you like this? What did I do wrong? You're no longer in love with a person, you're trying to decode an emotional labyrinth that you can't control. Why do we do this? Because deep down we feel powerless, and understanding them becomes the only way we feel in control again. If you grew up in an environment where emotions were denied, where you never knew what mood to expect next, your brain adapted to survive by constantly reading people. And now, you're doing the same thing with the narcissist in your life. The danger is, analysis becomes an addiction. You can't let go, because you believe, if I just understand deeply enough, I'll find the key to make them love me properly. But the more you understand, the more trapped you become. Because they don't need to be analyzed, they need to be held accountable. And you can't do that for them. The more you try to figure them out, the more you disconnect from yourself. You stop asking, what do I feel? And instead ask, what do they want? What are they thinking? What do I need to do to make them change? At its core, this is a subtle form of control. We think we're the victim, but the obsession keeps them at the center of our emotional universe. We hope to discover the answer, believing it will save both of us. But the truth is, there is no answer for someone who does not want to be understood. You're not here to decode another person. You're here to listen to yourself. You don't need to become a psychological analyst, you need to become an expert in recognizing what hurts you and walking away from it. Yes, analysis can be helpful in the beginning when you're first waking up to how you're being manipulated. But if you stay too long in analysis mode, you'll remain stuck in that relationship even after they've physically left. You'll keep replaying the past, obsessing over every word, every memory, and you'll never truly move on. They don't need you to understand them deeply. You need you to understand you deeply. And you can't do that if every night you're lying in bed with 1,000 questions about them. When your own soul is aching for a hug, a truth, and a letting go. Letting go is not failure. Letting go is when you realize that no amount of analysis will save someone who doesn't want to be saved. Trait 4. You try to control their behavior unconsciously. This may be the hardest truth to admit. When you love a narcissist, you may not have control over them, but you're still trying to control what they do, think, and feel in your own way. Unlike the narcissist who controls with power, threats, or calculated silence, you control with fear, anxiety, and the desperate hope that if they change, your pain will stop. You don't scream at them, but you beg, plead, complain, cry. You don't forbid them, but you monitor their moods, read into their messages, track their tone. You're constantly asking, are they cold today? Why are they texting less? Did I do something wrong? You don't say it out loud, but you live in a state of hypervigilance and subtle correction. You believe that if you say the right words, do the right things, react the right way, they'll finally change. But in truth, you are living in passive control. You're not controlling through power. You're controlling through sacrifice. You sacrifice your feelings, your boundaries, your self-worth, all to keep them stable. And when they finally act kindly, you breathe a sigh of relief, as if you've been rescued. But that's not peace. That's the relief of someone being held hostage by emotional chaos. Most people don't see this because they think, I'm just trying to make the relationship work. I just want to help. But the deeper truth is, you can't tolerate the feeling of being out of control. So instead of walking away from what feels unsafe, you try to fix the unsafe person gently, carefully, desperately. And that's where it gets dangerous. Because while you think of yourself as the one who endures, you are also manipulating, just from a weaker position. You want them to respond the way you need. You want them to behave like the person you dream of. You want them to see your worth, but you're too afraid to leave to prove it. This form of control hides behind love and sacrifice, but it is still control. And when you spend too long trying to manage someone else's emotions, you eventually lose all connection to your own. Here's the truth that sets you free. You cannot control anyone but yourself. You cannot force someone to love, to respect, or to see you. You can only choose to stay with what wounds you or walk away toward healing. In the next section, we'll explore trait 5, you change yourself to please them, and why this behavior, often disguised as deep love, is actually a painful erasure of your identity. If this truth resonates with you, hit subscribe, because the more you understand your fear of losing control, the more emotional freedom you'll reclaim from those who make you feel unsafe. Trait 5. You change yourself to please them. Who were you before you met them? Maybe you were someone who enjoyed slow breakfasts, oversized shirts, and soft music. But slowly things changed. Not because you truly wanted to, but because you began to adapt in order to keep them from leaving. You started eating what they liked, dressing in the style they found attractive, saying what they wanted to hear. You gave up the little joys, the harmless friendships that made them uncomfortable. You thought this was love. But in truth, it was self-adjustment rooted in the fear of being abandoned. You became a reduced version of yourself. You stopped living authentically. You began surviving within a relationship you believed was conditional. If I'm good enough, they'll stay. And that's the heartbreak. You were never loved for being you. You were only tolerated as long as you fit the role they wrote for you. This didn't happen overnight. It happened quietly, piece by piece. Every time they criticized something you loved, every glance that made you feel ashamed of your emotions, every moment you asked yourself, if I were less sensitive, would they stop judging me? You shrank. You made yourself smaller, and you called it love. But love isn't about disappearing so someone else can feel more comfortable. Love isn't about denying your truth to keep someone close. Here's the cruel twist. The more you change to keep them, the less they respect you. Because you're no longer the confident, whole person they were once drawn to. You've become a mirror reflecting their expectations. And once there's nothing left to chase, they grow cold. They pull away. And once again, you blame yourself for not being enough. But the truth is, you were enough from the very beginning when you were still you. In the next section, we'll explore trait 6. You keep going back to them even when you know they haven't changed. And the deep reason why this cycle isn't about love, it's about unresolved pain. If you feel like you've been disappearing in the name of love, hit subscribe and stay with us. Because you deserve to be loved without having to erase yourself. Trait 6. You keep going back to them even when you know they haven't changed. You know it. You know they're not truly sorry. You know their promise this time will be different is temporary. You know everything will return to how it was or worse. But you go back anyway. And you see it, not because you're foolish, not because you're weak, but because a part of you is still waiting for a happy ending. You hope that if you love deep enough, endure long enough, sacrifice more than enough, they'll finally see your worth. You're not going back for what they do now. You're going back for who you once imagined they were. You're not in love with the present. You're in love with the memory and the potential. And that's what keeps you stuck. Here's the painful truth. Every time you go back, you're teaching them that they don't need to change. That a few words of regret, a few tears are enough to win your forgiveness. That they can keep hurting you because you always come back. What you don't see is that every forgiveness without a boundary is a vote for your own pain. You're no longer just the victim, you're becoming the one who helps keep the cycle going. But the deeper reason you go back isn't about them. It's about you. It's about the wounded part of you that's never fully healed. The part that still believes, if I'm good enough, they won't leave. The part that was once abandoned, forgotten, made to feel unworthy, and is now trying to rewrite the past through the present. You're not going back to a person. You're going back to a pain that never got closure. And only when you realize this can you break the pattern. Because they may never change, but you can. You can stop listening to promises you no longer believe. You can stop blaming yourself for someone else's inability to love. You can stop sacrificing your future for someone who doesn't value your present. In the next section, we'll enter trait 7, the final and most critical piece of this painful cycle. You refuse to take responsibility for your role in the toxic dynamic. If you've ever gone back, ever hoped, ever broken your own heart for someone who won't change, hit subscribe and stay on this journey. Because the real ending doesn't begin when they stop, it begins when you choose not to go back. Trait 7. You refuse to take responsibility for your role in the toxic relationship. Here's a difficult truth. You're not the only cause, but you are part of the problem. In every relationship, especially those involving narcissists, we often get hurt so deeply that we only see what they did wrong. We retell the story in a way that casts them as the perfect villain while we play the helpless victim. But the real questions we should ask are, why did I choose this person? Why did I stay even when I was hurting? Why did I keep giving chances, forgiving, and getting hurt again? The answers aren't comfortable, because they force us to admit we helped keep the toxic cycle alive, not through violence, not through cruelty, but through silence, through unconditional forgiveness, through the constant dismissal of our own emotions. You think you were just enduring, but in reality, you silenced your own truth to maintain a connection with someone who didn't deserve it. You think you had no choice. But the truth is, every time you went back, forgave, or overlooked the pain, you chose to prolong your own suffering. And here's the painful part. As long as you don't take responsibility for your part, you will never truly heal. You'll keep retelling the story as someone who was betrayed, manipulated, and broken. But you'll leave out the most important detail. You stayed. You didn't set boundaries. You didn't walk away, even after your heart had been shattered over and over. True growth doesn't come from blame, it comes from honest self-reflection. Not to shame yourself, but to learn how not to repeat the cycle. You're not a bad person for loving the wrong one, but you will be failing yourself if you don't stop. This is the final piece, the one that unlocks true healing. The moment you stop telling your story as a victim and start living as someone who's awakened. If you're ready to enter that new chapter where you stop waiting to be saved and finally save yourself, hit subscribe and stay with us. Because truth doesn't weaken you, it sets you free. If you're still here listening until the very last moments of this video, then there's no doubt anymore. You've taken the first steps on the path of awakening. You've found the courage to face something most people avoid. Your own role in the pain. You've dared to hear the truth that you are not just someone who was hurt. You also, in quiet ways, helped keep that pain alive. Not because you're bad, but because you were never taught how to love yourself. From trait 1 to trait 7, you've seen the full arc of your journey. From the moment you ignored the red flags, to the times you tried to save them, analyzed them, changed yourself, endured the coldness, went back again and again. And finally you realized it's time to take responsibility for your part. You can't change the past, but you can break the cycle. You can't make them love you the right way, but you can learn to love yourself the right way for the first time in your life. Healing is not a destination. It is the process of no longer collecting the broken pieces of others to build the shape of yourself. It is the moment you stop being the analyzer, the fixer, the self-erasing caregiver, and return to being a whole human being who doesn't need permission to exist. Maybe you still love them. Maybe you still hope they'll change. But you already know, in the quietest part of your soul, they won't change unless they choose to. But you can change right here, right now. And that change doesn't begin in rage or rebellion. It begins with something far softer. Compassion. For yourself. Forgiveness for loving the wrong person. For staying too long. For hoping too much. Empathy for the version of you who did the best they could, at a time when they didn't know any better. So if today is the day you're ready to choose yourself, to stop, let go, and walk away from the old cycle, let this be the beginning. Hit subscribe, turn on the notifications, and stay with us on this healing journey. A path where you are no longer defined by those who once hurt you, but by the courage it takes to return to the truth of who you really are.